Aye, vast you landlubbers. It's Captain Pegleg here, and we've set out to sea. We're going to take the digital prisoner somewhere where you'll never find him. We're out to find an island to maroon him on. Har, har, har. But we'll let him tell you about some other people who went out. Oh, that's a big wave. Went out looking for something new. And you better be on your best behavior or he'll be walking the plank, that one will. All right, all right. So, thank you, Captain Pegleg. All right, we're here to talk about Europeans outward bound. So we're going to talk today about people leaving Europe and what they're looking for and what they actually find. All right, so setting the stage for exploration. There's a lot of things that led to this. We're going to hit a few highlights, like the Gutenberg press came out in the mid 1400s, and you can see a picture of it over here, or a version of it. The Gutenberg press allowed people to start making books and charts and a lot of things and getting them sent out to people. They could post a lot of information and so forth. And more people started becoming educated, and it allowed people to learn upon what other people had already did. And so knowledge and all this started spreading more and more. And one of the things that spread was Marco Polo's book, The Description of the World. And there he talked about all these wonderful things he had seen while he was in Asia. And the people in Europe were like, wow, I want to go see these things. I want to see these amazing things. And through the Silk Road, people had been trading with Asia, and a lot of the people in Europe had this huge desire for the silks and spices from India and China and so forth. But the problem is that the Silk Road had fallen under different rule, and sections of it, it was very dangerous to cross, or you had to pay very high taxes to cross it, which made the trip less profitable. And then the Protestant Reformation. Um, in 1517, a guy by the name of Martin Luther, and don't confuse him with Martin Luther King. This was a guy who was a German monk. He nailed, and you can see a picture here, the 95 Thesis to the wall of the church. And he wasn't, trying to diss the church. He was trying to challenge. That's what you would put up if you had a debate about something and you wanted to question something. You would put it up there. And so he wanted to bring these things to light and discuss these issues that he found with the church, which led to the Protestant Reformation. Um, now, so let's talk about setting sail. Uh, Portugal. We're going to focus on Portugal for a minute, and we'll talk back and forth about Portugal and everything. Prince Henry the Navigator. He was never actually one to go out and sail, but he encouraged the exploration of the coast of Africa. He uh, had everybody, he paid them and funded expeditions to go out and to explore the coast of Africa. And we'll look at a map here in just a second. And he helped invent caravels, which were a faster ship that could sail closer to the coast, so they could see more of the coast and weren't so far out. Bartholomew Dias. In 1488, he actually made it to the southern tip of Africa. Vasco da Gama, in 1498, he actually made it to India. And India, remember, is one of the places everybody's trying to get to. They needed a faster, cheaper route to make it there instead of the Silk Road. And Vasco da Gama found that route. And he was able to start trading for spices and so forth. And another guy who sailed for Portugal, and this is, to us is a very important guy, was a guy by the name of Amerigo Vespucci. He was an Italian, And in 1501, he actually sailed for Portugal, but in 1499, he actually went on a expedition for Spain. So he sailed for both Spain and Portugal. Now, this is after Columbus had already sailed and thought he had landed in India. He thought he could find a quicker route in India and actually lands in what today we know as the Americas. Well, Amerigo Vespucci sailed there and he realized this isn't India. This is Mundus Novus, which means a new world. Uh, and due to a map maker's mistake, he named this Amerigo's Mundus Nova, so America's New World, and that's where we get the name Americas. North and South America are named after Amerigo Vespucci. Now you can see here, uh, this little area right here is Portugal, and this is where those guys sailed from. You can see where he came down and made it to the tip of Africa here, and then on around to India. So you can see if they could go straight this way, it's a lot shorter, but they had to go up, come through here, and then they were running into issues through here, and so they wanted to find a way to sail there, and they did come in this way. Now, Columbus, who we'll talk about here in a minute, thought that he could go this direction and come up behind India. What they did not know is that all of this land here existed. Okay? And Amerigo Vespucci is the one that said, "Hey, this is actually a new world. This is not India over here." And where Columbus lands, and we'll talk about it, is right over here. Okay? Um, So let's talk about that. Spain. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We've all heard that story. He landed in the Bahamas, and he called it San Salvador. The local people, the Taino, uh, he called them Indians because he thought he had sailed around to here, India. Instead, he was here. Um, he went on to Cuba and Hispaniola. And while going through these, and he had several voyages, he killed and enslaved hundreds of natives. Okay, uh, if they challenged him or if they wouldn't give him the gold or whatever, he'd kill them or enslave them. And he took a bunch back as gifts to take back to Spain. Um, Another notable is Hernan Cortez. In the 1500s, he's credited pretty much for wiping out the Aztecs. And Francisco Pizarro, also in the 1500s, wiped out the Incans. And this happened, and we'll talk about a little more about it through disease. Um, and these were conquistadors. A lot of the Spanish people who came over exploring were conquistadors. And they were looking for uh, gold and riches, and they kept hearing these stories of El Dorado, a city of gold, and so they were looking for it. So there was a lot of tension between Spain and Portugal, neighbors back in Europe. You can see here's Portugal, and here's Spain. Um, Over who gets what part of this new world. Well, the Pope, Alexander the Sixth, um, gives part of Brazil, or gives Brazil to and Africa to Portugal, and Spain gets the rest of the New World. Well, uh, a year later, this is written up into the Treaty of Tordesillas. Um, and becomes this treaty how they divide up the new world. That's why when you go to South America, part of them speak Portuguese while other ones speak Spanish because it was divided up and Spain got part of it while Portugal got Brazil, which influenced some of the surrounding areas. And Spain would go on to settle Central America, and part of Northern America until some other people join in on some of these expeditions. Strained relations. There was a lot of strained relations between the Indians and um, the settlers, those people coming from Europe, the Europeans. Uh, Spain and Portugal, and we're going to talk about religious beliefs real quick. Spain and Portugal thought that the natives were just uncivilized heathens. Oh, these are people, they walk around half naked and, they live in these huts and they walk around barefoot and, they don't even speak a proper language. These are uncivilized people who believe in all these, off the wall gods, and they believed that they had a God given right to rule these natives and convert them to Christianity. And how they converted them is they pretty much came in and speaking in Portuguese or Spanish would tell them either you convert to Christianity or you're going to die. You accept God Almighty or die. Well, a lot of the natives didn't even understand what they were saying, and so they killed a lot of natives because they didn't convert when told to. Um, and eventually, some of the translations, they learned to speak each other's languages a bit. So they can kind of understand each other, and a lot of them they try to still convert them, and they would take some and force them into slavery. And so you were either most of the natives that these uh, Europeans would run into would either be killed or put into slavery. There was a class system set up in the Spanish colonies, and if you were a peninsular, because remember Spain is a peninsula. If you look back here, you can see Spain is a peninsula. It's got water on all the sides except one. Um, you were a Spaniard who was born in Spain. Now, Creoles, and here in Louisiana we have Creoles. These were your Spanish-born and raised in America. Okay, they were full-blooded two Spanish parents, and they were raised in America. And then you had your mestizos. These were a mixed race. These were people who had one Spanish parent and one native parent. Okay, and you notice now that you mix in the native blood, this is lower down the rank. And the only people lower were the natives. If you were full-blooded native, you did a lot of the work, through mainly slavery. Well, the Europeans' greatest weapon was disease. When the Europeans came over from Europe, they brought with them diseases that the Indians had not had the time to build immunity to. Because the Europeans have been born there, had dealt with these diseases their whole lives. Their parents had built immunities, passed it on to them, and so forth. And these immunities had grown throughout their lives. Well, the natives did not have these immunities. And so when diseases such as smallpox was introduced to their populations, it spread and it wiped out so many of the Native Americans. It's believed that that the diseases could have killed up to 90% of natives. And this is actually how the Aztecs and the Incas and a lot of these were wiped out. There was, barely any left after these diseases ravaged their people. All right, exploring America. Spain. Ponce de Leon, and it's one of my favorites. He explored Puerto Rico and Florida, and he was searching for the mythical fountain of youth. You know, he heard stories that he could find this fountain that would grant him, everlasting life and keep him young forever. And he looked and looked for it, but he never found it. Uh, Hernando de Soto. He's found Florida, Georgia, Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama. and he was the first to cross the Mississippi River. Coronado, uh, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, these are the areas he explored, and he found the Grand Canyon. St. Augustine set up the oldest permanent settlement, St. Augustine, in North America. This was a Spanish settlement that is the oldest permanent settlement in North America. Ferdinand Magellan, he circumnavigated the globe from it took him from 1519 to 1522, and he died along the voyage, but is given credit because his crew finished the voyage. England, Sir Walter Raleigh. In 1584, he sent two ships to Roanoke, Virginia, and Virginia is named after Queen Elizabeth. And you say, well, that doesn't sound anything like Queen Elizabeth. She was called the Virgin Queen, and so that's where Virginia comes. In 15, that colony had issues, had a lot of problems, and failed. In 1587, they sent more ships to Roanoke to get Roanoke going up again. And whenever he left, because he had to go back to England, it came back, and the whole village had disappeared. And the only thing left was a word carved into a tree, Croatan. Okay, that one word was carved into a tree, kind of like right up here, and that was all that was left of this whole village. Right, the Virginia Company. In 1607, it started Jamestown, which was named after James I, who was now King of England. In 1608, Captain John Smith became governor. And now, when we hear John Smith, we think of this Pocahontas, this fairy tale told to us by Disney. Now, how accurate is that story? Not very. Okay. Uh, Captain Smith had very good relations with the Indians. Um, and a lot of this relationship with the Indians, he had a good relationship with Powhatan, who was the chief of the Indians that lived near him. And Pocahontas was kind of a go-between. She had kind of picked up a bit of their language. She was young. At this time, she was maybe 14 years old. And so she would uh, kind of be the go-between between uh, John Smith and Powhatan. And so John Smith was very disciplined and kept the colonists in line. You know, they made sure that they didn't mistreat the Indians, that they, kept working. Pretty much, told them, hey, if you're not going to work, well, then you can go over there and die. We're going to work and get this, village able to stand. Because remember, a lot of people came over here looking for riches and didn't know how to work the land. And so they uh, found it a lot rougher and harder than they expected. So John Smith gets sent back to England, and war winds up breaking out between the colony and the Indians. Um, they began lacking the discipline. I'm pretty sure they moved in on territories owned by the Indians and so forth, and this war breaks out between them. Uh, in order to get things back more peaceful, Pocahontas marries uh, a guy who becomes leader of the colony, John Rolfe, in 1614. And he made the colony profitable by growing tobacco. And Pocahontas actually winds up going to England with Rolfe at one point because everybody had heard all these fantastic stories about Pocahontas and stuff. And this here is a portrait of Pocahontas from England. She actually winds up dying there in England. Um, Slavery in the New World. In 1550, one out of every 10 uh, people in Lisbon, which was the capital of Portugal, were African slaves. Slavery had become a very big thing. Well, slavery has been around since the dawn of time. Um, when one civilization captured another one, they would force them into slavery. Well, African slavery started becoming big around this time, taking slaves from African. from Africa, because a lot of those tribes would war with each other, and then they would sell the people they caught to the Portugal traders and so forth. Um, well, in the early 1500s, Spain began bringing African slaves into the New World because the Indian ones they had, were dying from all the disease. Well, Africa's there with Europe, and a lot of the diseases had carried through, and they had built up a lot of the immunities. So these African slaves wound up working a lot better than the Indian ones because they didn't die so easily from the disease. Um, and as I mentioned earlier, most people went to America looking for golds and riches, and these stories like Columbus had brought all this gold and stuff back, and not to really work the land. And some didn't know how to do it, others just refused because it was just such hard work. And so slavery was the answer they were looking for. And so slavery began to flourish in the early New World. So until next time, deuces!